All right, welcome to T's Kitchen. Today we're going to make some high hydration bread. We're making a 87% hydration bread, and let's get started. So we'll just wait for the bowl to stop moving around, and to which we're going to add water. Now, this is 77% water to the recipe, which is 385 milliliters of water, to which we're going to add 50 milliliters of olive oil, which is actually 10% to this recipe, after which we're going to add some yeast. Now, we're going to mix the yeast into the water because this is one of the most important steps of bread making. We're kind of trying to dissolve the yeast here. I've specifically used pizza dough yeast because that's all I had. Now I'm trying to make sure that the yeast gets dissolved, and I'm looking for some bubbles. Now, interestingly, yeast will start when we add flour to this. This is when the yeast will start activating. So the next step is adding flour. We're going to add about 500 grams of flour, which is 100% to our recipe. Now the yeast will start feeding on the sugar that's in the flour. We'll start by getting a wooden spoon and mixing. Now remember, this is a very high hydrated dough, so it is going to be very sticky and messy. And then at the end, we're going to add 15 grams of salt, which is 3% to this recipe. And again, now the yeast is going to break down the sugars in the flour, and it's going to create carbon dioxide and a byproduct of alcohol, which is basically known as fermentation. So right now I'm just making sure that the dough is mixed properly and there is no dry spots. Once that is done, I'm just going to take my bench scraper and scrape all the remaining dough from the wooden spoon into the bowl because I don't like to waste. Alright, so now that part is done, we're going to take a kitchen towel and I'm going to let it set for about an hour. Yeah, so I'm just going to let it set, and after an hour I'm going to come back and go into the second part of bread making. Alright, so now it's been an hour. I'm going to start in the second stage. I've got a bowl of water. I'm going to wet my hand because working with high hydration dough requires some water, otherwise it ends up in a sticky, gooey mess. So I'm just going to show you the water. I'm just wetting my palm to make sure that it's coated in water, and now I'm going to start stretching and folding. This actually helps strengthen the gluten. It also helps the bread form a better shape. So by stretching the gluten, I'm actually making sure that the gluten gets activated, the gluten gets stronger by mixing and stretching. So this process is known as stretch and fold. I'm going to do this again in about 20 minutes. So now that I've done the first part, I'm going to rest it again, and we'll come back in 20 minutes. Okay, so now it's been 20 minutes. Ta-da, look at that. So the yeast is also helping the gluten and the bread to rise. That's perfect. The fermentation has worked properly. I'm just going to start the dough again by wetting my palm and trying to do the same process, which is stretching and folding. Again, this strengthens the gluten and also it also helps with the bread to dough up better. So I'm going to do this process again, which is called stretch and fold. By now you've already heard me say this twice. And so I'm stretching and strengthening the gluten, and I'm going to let that rest again before I start scaling and dividing. Okay, so now that the dough has rested, now we're going to scale and divide. I'm going to lightly flour my working bench. In this case, I just have a kitchen island where I'm going to flour it so the sticky dough does not stick everywhere. You're going to see how sticky and tacky it can be working with high hydration dough. So I'm just going to let the dough relax and come out of the bowl clean, to which now I'm also going to add a little bit of flour onto my bench scraper because I want to cut that dough evenly. Now you can traditionally weigh it, but I'm just going to eyeball and break it into two equal parts. And I'm going to start working my way with the first one. So I'm just kind of making a fold pocket, and then I'm folding it over, and again, you can see me struggle with how sticky the dough is, but once you start practicing, it gets better and better. Now I'm also going to use the bench scraper to kind of shape the dough. I'm kind of rolling it to make surface tension on the dough. Now I'm kind of rolling it and creating surface tension. I will show you the dough in a minute. I'm going to work on the next one. So again, stretching, folding. It's almost called like a book fold, and then I'm going to fold that back over and create the same process. Just going to make sure that it doesn't stick to the table, and I'm using just enough flour. Okay, so this kind of dough is also a very lazy man's dough. Now I'm going to get my banneton prepped. I have sprinkled some rice flour into my banneton, and that helps it from sticking because it is very highly hydrated. You don't want to end up with a dough that sticks onto your banneton. So I have one of my dough prepped in the banneton for proofing, and I'm going to work on my second one where I'm just going to free fold it and not use a banneton, just use a free folding shape because at this point it is homemaker's bread, so I don't really care about perfection. So again, just kind of stretching, strengthening the dough and stretching and making sure that I have some nice surface tension on the dough. And once I've done that, I'm crimpling any open edges because I don't want the dough to change its shape, because if you don't form it properly, it could turn into a different shape. So here's my second dough that is in the banneton. I'm just letting it rest. I'm going to let it rest for an hour, and here is the dough after an hour. Now I'm just going to take parchment paper because it's convenient. It's not going to stick to anything. And I'm going to take my free-formed dough, put it onto the parchment paper, and just going to flip my banneton onto the parchment paper, and you're going to see a beautiful pattern. Now, if I had more time, I would definitely rest it in the fridge. I like final fermentation in the fridge because the fermentation goes slower, and obviously you're a little bit more in control versus leaving it out there, because as the yeast starts rising, eventually it will die down, and so I am trying to work as fast as I can to get it at the highest leavening point. And so, yes, I'm just going to use my cast iron pan and just whatever pans I got at home to bake it. Now, I also have this bread scoring knife that I'm just going to make a quick score. I'm not looking for a baker's ear because this isn't sourdough bread. I just want some beautiful scoring. Back in the day, they would score the bread so that they could recognize whose bread it was, because there would be a communal oven, and that's why scoring happens, and that's how it began. But I'm just going to make some nice scoring to make sure my bread looks nice, and at this point I'm going to pop it in the oven. I've also preheated my oven to 400 degree Fahrenheit, and yeah, 25 minutes later, here's the bread. It looks beautiful. It has a very nice crunchy top. And that's the free-formed dough that I have. And you can look at it. I've just made some basic shapes, and that's that. Enjoy.